that you know how to set up your wheel fit tool on the vehicle and get the proper fitment, this is our educational portion where we're going to discuss terminology like backside setting, offset, bolt pattern, and other things that you need to know correctly to be able to build the wheel that you want to fit your car and tell the manufacturer the information that they need so that everybody gets it all together straight and the two pieces come together correctly when they bolt on the car. The first thing that we want to start on is to learn how to measure our backside setting. This is a very critical measurement, and of course you see how we use it on the wheel fit tool. Here's how it looks on an actual wheel. Take your wheel, place it face down. Now you're going to need a straight edge of some type that will overhang the back flange of the wheel. We've got just a simple piece of wood here in the shop, and I'm going to demonstrate how this is going to work. You let the straight edge overhang the rear flange, and you take your ruler or tape measure and you drop it perpendicular straight down to the mounting pad. Now the distance from the mounting pad to the bottom of the straight edge is your backside setting. In this case, it's 3 3/4 of an inch, as you can see here on the tape. Okay, so now you know backside setting. Now we're going to move to offset. Offset is the relationship of the mounting pad to the center line of the wheel. Using our wheel as a demonstration, the center line of the wheel is the exact center of the wheel with half in the front and half in the rear. That is our center line. Now the relationship of that mounting pad to that center line in a distance measured in millimeters is our offset. If the mounting pad is toward the street, that's positive offset. If the mounting pad is toward the rear of the wheel, that's negative offset. In our example here, we've got a negative offset wheel. It's a 15 by 10. It has a 3 3/4 inch backside setting. There is a direct mathematical correlation between backside setting and offset, and we're going to show it to you here so that you'll understand it. In your paper instructions, you'll see a cheat sheet that is very useful. It's a simple chart, backside setting going in one direction and width going in the other. When the two come together, you know exactly where you're at between your backside setting and your width, and the millimeter offset is right there in the middle. Now you understand the difference between backside setting and offset. Let me tell you the calculation to convert between one and the other. If you take your width in inches, and that's the measured width from bead to bead, add 1 inch. That's a ½ inch for each flange, front and rear. That's your overall width. Now divide that in half. That's your center line. Now take that number and subtract it from your backside setting. That number in inches, multiply it by 25.4, and that will give you your millimeter offset. If it's a negative number, then that's negative offset. If it's a positive number, then obviously it's positive offset. That's the relationship between those two measurements, but it's very critical that you understand because some manufacturers use one figure, other manufacturers use the other. You need to be able to understand how they relate to each other. Here's several diagrams to help you understand the difference between a reversed offset, a standard offset, medium offset, and then high positive offset. We'll take a look at the reversed offset first. That's where the mounting pad is toward the very back of the wheel. That means it'd be like a 2.5 or 3 inch backside setting. Now then you've got a standard offset. Standard offset is where the mounting pad is in the middle of the wheel. It doesn't necessarily have to be at 0 offset, but maybe plus or minus 12 millimeters one direction or the other. And then you've got medium offset, which is typically in your plus 25 to plus 30, depending on the width of the wheel. But the mounting pad is forward of center line, but not all the way out toward the front. And then of course you've got your high positive offset, where the mounting pad is way out toward the front of the wheel. Typically it's a flat face. And this is most common, and you see in more modern vehicles, whereas typical street rods, muscle cars of the pre-80s era are going to have a standard to reversed offset, just to kind of give you an idea of what you should expect to see on most all of your applications. Now let's talk about some common lug nuts so you'll be prepared to bolt the tool to your car correctly and understand what's out there in the market. First, we have your acorn bulge lug nut, which typically has a 3/4 hex and has a fat head on it. The other one that you may not be familiar with, but is a great lug nut, especially if you have to use a spacer on a vehicle for some reason or another. You know, perhaps you can't build the wheel the exactly way you need, or a buddy may have wheels on his car that he can't buy the wheels that he needs yet, but he needs to make them fit. Maybe pick them up at a swap meet. This is called an ET Mag lug nut. And if you look right here, it's conical seat, so it fits most all common wheels with a 60-degree taper, but it has a little tiny shank on the end. And what that little shank does is it gives you an extra 5 or 6 turns on the lug nut. So if you've got a small spacer plate on there, this one lug nut right here will help make up those lost threads by actually going further down into the lug hole and giving you more bite and clamping force. The other neat thing about this particular lug nut is if you know someone with a front-wheel drive vehicle that has a little vibration in it, especially at highway speed, many times this type of a lug nut will help center a lug-centric wheel directly onto the hub of the vehicle, make it straighter and more centered, and hopefully should eliminate some of the vibration. Here's some other lug nuts that we have. You may be familiar with mag shank lug nuts. Now you've got a standard mag lug nut, which is about 3/4 of an inch, and you also have an extended mag lug nut like this one right here, which is common in your old Krager SST wheels and some other racing type applications. It's got a 1.379 inch shank, or somewhere pretty close to that. The important thing to remember, depending on what the application is, these lug nuts have to have a washer. Many times the washer is built onto them, but if you're working with an old school application, such as like a Krager SS or a Keystone Classic, you're going to need the additional washers, and you're going to need to make sure that you have the correct washers there. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here's the Krager washers. Notice that they have a round outside diameter. One's punched in the middle, one's punched to the side. Notice on the back that it says wheel side actually engraved into the washer. You'll make sure that that faces the wheel. There's a concave shape to this washer, so as you torque your lug nut to spec, this washer applies a little bit of resistance to it and presses against the wheel to hold it in place. Now the center punched washer is used for a 5-on-4 3/4 bolt pattern, whereas the offset washer is used for 5-on-4 1/2 and 5-on-5 bolt patterns. Now if you have a 5-on-5 bolt pattern, it'll only fit a 1/2 inch stud, not the 88 and up trucks with a 14mm stud. That's a completely different part number. Now if you're working with a Keystone Classic, the washer on it has an oval outside diameter. Again, it uses a center punched and an offset punched washer to fit the bolt patterns that we mentioned earlier on the Krager SS. This washer specifically sits down into a recess that's actually cast into the wheel. So make sure, whichever one that you're working on, that you have the correct washer and that you have it placed on the wheel exactly where it needs to go. Now the next one that we have isn't that common on street rod applications, but many times you'll get a kit like this and you'll need to know how to handle it. A number of years ago, what was called a socket lug, commonly known as a tuner lug, was developed and brought onto the market. It works okay, but the problem is it has an open end. It allows moisture and dirt and debris to get down there and can typically seize up the lug nut onto the stud. Also, the hex head key that comes with these generally gets worn down fairly quickly and gets to a point to where you can't get proper torque on the lug nut to make sure that you get the clamping force that you need to maintain the wheel on the vehicle. If you run across these, or if someone sends you this, I highly recommend not installing this particular product, but actually opt for the spline drive. The spline lug nut has a closed end. It looks much like a key, and the key that fits over it is on the exterior, so it's got plenty of bite, much better application. They make these for smaller diameter, 12mm tuner style applications, as well as normal street rod applications, but they also make some truck versions as well in the 14mm size. It's a good application, it works very well. Just make sure you remember where the key is and write down the number of the key. If you lose it, many times you can call the factory and get a replacement key for just a few dollars. Next we've got lug bolts. These are common on European applications. You've got the lug bolts with a 60-degree conical seat, which is typical of your BMW. But then you've got a number of ball seat applications like this one right here. Notice the length of the bolt is pretty long on this application. These are designed for specific vehicles and specific wheels. This bolt that secures an aluminum wheel on the vehicle is not necessarily going to be the correct one if you put like a spare tire wheel on the vehicle, which typically has a steel wheel. Also, if you put an aftermarket wheel application on one of these European vehicles, typically your Mercedes, Audi, VW, you need to verify that the bolt that came off the car protrudes through the lug hole the same distance as the original factory wheel. If it pushes too far through there, it can actually get into the braking system and cause other damage potentially with the car. So make sure that the length of this thread here, the part that sticks out, is identical on the OEM wheel as well as on your aftermarket application. One way to overcome this is to install what's called a stud conversion, which is a stud by itself that is threaded on both sides. It simply screws into the hub of the vehicle and allows you to use a standard lug nut on that vehicle. Again, you need to make sure you have the correct thread sticking out so that you've got full lug nut engagement. Now I'm going to talk about eccentric ring. This ring essentially takes up the gap difference between the hub of the vehicle and the center bore of the wheel. It allows the wheel to be placed on the hub much like a factory wheel and allows it to be hub centric. It gives you a very good fitment, helps to keep the wheel straight while you torque the lug nuts down, and can reduce or completely eliminate vibration. If you're building a wheel that is custom, typically they machine the wheel to your specific vehicle. But if you're taking a wheel out of the box, typically the center bore is large enough to fit a number of different vehicles that have the exact same bolt pattern. So keep that in mind. Centric rings can help eliminate that vibration and center the wheel properly. Now I'm going to talk about how to measure the bolt pattern. The 4, 6, and 8 lug bolt patterns are pretty easy. Take a ruler or measuring tape and measure from the center of one bolt hole across the center bore to the center of the bolt hole opposite. In inches, that will tell you what the diameter of a circle is that goes through those bolt holes. Now for a 5 lug application, it's a little bit different and it's only approximate. Let me show you how this works. Place your ruler in the middle of one bolt hole and measure to the very outside edge of the bolt hole directly across the center bore. Now because you're measuring off center and not directly across the center bore, you have to compensate slightly. That's why we go from the center of one bolt hole to the outside edge of the other one. Now this is useful in trying to determine if something is, if a wheel or a vehicle is 5 1/4 1/2, 5 1 3/4, 5 on 5. What it is not accurate enough to tell you is if you're working with a 5 on 4 1/2 or a 5 on 115 millimeter, or a 5 on 120 millimeter and a 5 on 4 3/4, which are only a fraction of a millimeter difference between the two. But this will help you out if you're at the swap meet or working on a project car and you're not certain what's exactly on there. It is accurate enough for that. One other measurement that you're going to need to know is called X factor, or caliper clearance. This is the distance behind the spokes of the wheel that allow room for your brake caliper. Now the distance from the mounting pad to the back of the spoke in inches would be considered your X factor. What you want to make sure of is that you have plenty of mounting pad, depending on if you have a big brake application, that you want to convey that information to your wheel manufacturer so that they know exactly where to build your wheel and how much curvature behind the spoke is going to be required to clear your brake package. Now you can do this manually with a tape measure and a ruler and a straight edge, or you can purchase from us an X factor gauge just like these. These are anodized aluminum and they allow you to simply place the tool up against the hub and it tells you exactly in how many millimeters is needed to clear that caliper. It's a great tool. Call us if you're interested in one of these and we can get it shipped right out to you. Alright, there you go. You understand how to set up your tool, you understand how to set up the suspension, and you know all the terminology and dimensions you need on a custom wheel to make sure that you communicate all the things that you need effectively with the distributor or the manufacturer of the wheel that you're going to purchase. Using this information, there's no reason at all that you can't get exactly what you're looking for. So push the limit, most power that you can get, correct offset, and when you get done, make sure you send us the photos of the build process as well as that finished product. Contact us if you need any help at 251-377-6724. You can email me at wheelworks@bellsouth.net, and also you can get in touch with me on our Facebook page at facebook.com/WheelWorksInc. I appreciate you buying a wheel fit from us, and I look forward to seeing that picture. Take it easy.